Hello there, you cheeky criminals. Today, I'd like to bring your attention to yet another murder case, but one that is just a fragment of a much larger, a much more insidious and harrowing situation taking place at this very moment as we speak, as I film this and as you watch this. And if you care about the future of our planet, as I hope you do, then you should be very concerned about this story I'm about to tell. Now, before we dive into the many sordid details of murder, death, corruption, and destruction that I'll be covering, we first need to go to Brazil, specifically the Amazon rainforest. Now, what do you remember from school about the Amazon? Yes, it's the world's largest tropical rainforest, but did you know or do you remember that it also plays an incredibly important role in mitigating climate change by absorbing and storing carbon dioxide? As the forest is cut down, it not only ceases to fulfill that primary function, but the trees also then release that stored carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, which can accelerate global warming. And climate scientists do agree that carbon dioxide from tropical deforestation now makes up nearly 10% of global warming pollution on Earth. And by the way, if you are a climate change denier, this is probably not the video for you. This pivotal role is why the Amazon is considered to be the lungs of our planet. But currently, at this very moment, those very lungs are being slashed into bits. You see, 60% of the Amazon is located within Brazil's borders, and in Brazil, there are large syndicates of people, of actual criminals who are actively destroying the Amazon and killing people that are getting in their way. According to Human Rights Watch, the illegal deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon is largely caused by these criminal networks that coordinate the extraction, the processing, and sale of timber, often protecting their interests with armed men and acts of violence. Some environmental officials call these groups the Rainforest Mafia. But regardless of their name, these groups are responsible for the over 300 people who have been killed in the last decade alone because of these conflicts involving land use and resources in the Amazon. But now, where does the cold-blooded murder of an American nun play into all of this? Born into a large Catholic family in Dayton, Ohio in 1931, Dorothy Stang was a nun with the Sisters of Notre Dame de Namur community, a Catholic institute of religious sisters that was founded to provide education to the poor. In 1966, after years of teaching elementary school at various Catholic schools in Illinois and Arizona, Sister Dorothy Stang was sent as a missionary to Brazil. Now, for all the controversy that we could but won't get into about missionary work, because that's a whole other topic, Sister Dorothy Stang was by all accounts a true saint of a woman who ironically basically converted herself into a Brazilian, as she even obtained Brazilian citizenship after moving there. Soon after her arrival in Brazil, Stang began dedicating her life to defending the Brazilian rainforests from the illegal logging that was running rampant. Stang also began helping local peasants make a living by farming small plots and extracting materials from the rainforest without resorting to deforestation. In later years, Stang was even often pictured wearing a t-shirt with the Portuguese slogan "A morte da floresta é o fim da nossa vida," which translates to "The death of the forest is the end of our lives." I think what sums it up best is the name that Stang was given by the locals, as she became known as the Angel of the Amazon. I mean, I don't think it gets any better than that. If I were down in Brazil, they'd probably call me the lunatic of the Amazon or something, so good for her. In 1982, Stang moved to a small town on the Trans-Amazon Highway and began working for the CPT, Brazil's Catholic Church's Pastoral Land Commission. The CPT was created in 1975 by Brazilian bishops in response to landowners using gunmen to intimidate and clear peasant farmers from disputed land, which often led to bloodshed. Thus, Stang sought to protect peasants from those criminal gangs who were working on behalf of ranchers and willing to kill peasants to continue deforestation. Despite her disputes with landowners and numerous threats against her, Stang moved forward with developing a land distribution project known as the Project for Sustainable Development, or PDS, a project that was praised by Brazilian government officials. Brazilian federal prosecutor Felicio Pontes once said, "Sister Dorothy's PDS project is the most successful land reform project in the Amazon. It has helped more than 300 settlers make a living in a sustainable way." But of course, all this great work and progress did not go down well with the many ranchers and their corrupt allies. And ultimately, it started a domino effect, which would eventually end in tragedy. February 12, 2005. Sister Dorothy Stang was walking to a community meeting to speak about the continuing plight in the rainforest. A witness said she was stopped by several men who worked for a livestock company that depended on land and these illegal deforestation efforts for financial gain. The men then asked if she had any weapons. They asked a nun if she had any weapons, and she replied that the only weapon she had was her Bible. She then began reading aloud from the Beatitudes, reciting, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." And in response, one of the men shot her in the abdomen, then in the back after she fell. Finally, the man fired 4 remaining rounds into her head. 4 additional shots into the head of an elderly, unarmed nun. Ultimately, 5 men were accused of Stang's murder. 4 were convicted and 1 was acquitted. A local rancher named Vitalmiro Bastos de Mura was convicted of ordering Stang's murder in several different trials following appeals. Prosecutors said Mura ordered the hit because Stang had sent letters to local authorities accusing Mura of starting illegal fires in order to clear land, which led to Mura incurring significant fines. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison, but he is now out and free. The shooter, Haifran das Neves Sales, was sentenced to 28 years in prison. However, in July 2013, Neves Sales gained early release from prison. He was arrested again the next year under suspicion of killing another woman and a young man during a drug deal. I mean, I don't think I really need to state enough how heinous this act was. I mean, of course, Sister Dorothy Stang's life was no more valuable than the others who also laid down their lives in the fight against these criminals. However, this murder, and I stress once again, a murder of an elderly unarmed nun, goes to show just how far these criminals are willing to go. In over 60 interviews with federal and state officials involved in environmental or criminal law enforcement in Brazil, Human Rights Watch found that violence in defense of deforestation has been a significant problem for years. They've documented 28 of such killings, most between 2015 and 2019, plus 4 attempted murders and more than 40 death threats. Some of these victims were environmental officials, but most were indigenous people or other forest residents who denounced illegal logging activities to authorities. Victims of the struggle, the list goes on and on. They include an environmental defender and 5 other individuals who were killed because a landowner involved in illegal logging thought they would report his criminal activities, and so of course, the easiest thing to do, kill them. Another resident of the Terra Nossa settlement was killed and another disappeared after they admitted plans to report illegal logging. The brother of one of the victims was also killed, along with the leader of a farmers' trade union who intended to report the crimes. Are we seeing a pattern here? Anytime anyone wants to speak out against these criminals, they end up being murdered or they disappear. Even a state police sergeant was killed by a suspected logger during an anti-logging operation. But before you start to think of law enforcement as being victims in this too, it's worth noting that an environmental defender was murdered by 2 active police officers who were hired by a retired police officer who in turn was working for a landowner allegedly engaged in what? Illegal logging. I mean, truly, I could keep going because the list goes on and on and on. And unfortunately, the perpetrators of these crimes in the Brazilian Amazon rarely face justice. Of the more than 300 killings reported by the Catholic Land Commission since 2009, only 14 ultimately went to trial. Of the 28 killings documented by Human Rights Watch, only 2 went to trial. And of the more than 40 cases of attacks or threats recorded by Human Rights Watch, none went to trial. And as of 2019, criminal charges had been filed in only a single case. Federal and state prosecutors, as well as environmental officials, say the lack of accountability is the result of failures by police to conduct proper investigations into the crimes. Now, local police, they admit some shortcomings in the investigations, but they attribute this to the remote locations of many of the crimes. However, when Human Rights Watch interviewed police officers involved in investigating 6 cases of murder in the Maranhão state, The group found that in at least 2 investigations, police did not even visit the scene of the crime, and in 5 cases, no autopsy was even conducted. Human Rights Watch also found that in at least 4 of the 6 cases, the deaths occurred in urban centers with local police stations, which counters the claim that the remote locations of these crimes hinders investigations. Antonio de Oliveira, a retired federal police officer who worked to forcibly expel loggers from the Arariboya Reserve, said there is a lack of people, a lack of resources, a lack of logistics, and a lack of will to stop deforestation. On top of all this, there are other factors contributing to the difficulty in fighting deforestation that's on a much more political scale. Brazil's far-right president Jair Bolsonaro has actually launched a series of attacks on environmental agencies for levying fines and destroying loggers' equipment. And if that's not wild enough, Bolsonaro even told reporters that indigenous people have too much land designated for them anyway. And I quote, "I've already said 14% of the Amazon are indigenous reserves. How did they manage to have so much land designated indigenous? How did they manage to have so much land designated indigenous?" After criticism from France, Germany, and Norway, Bolsonaro did take action and banned most legal fires for land clearing in the Amazon, but only for 60 days. Bolsonaro and his ministers have also called this international concern about the development of the Amazon as an attack on Brazilian sovereignty. And if you're wondering how a man can become so thick-headed, and that's a very kind way of putting it, I think it will all become very apparent when I reveal that, according to The Guardian, many of these individuals involved in land grabbing, illegal mining, and deforestation in protected areas are pro-Bolsonaro voters. So what actually needs to be done in order to try and curb all this seemingly relentless destruction? Well, firstly, according to Human Rights Watch, Brazil needs to take steps to end impunity for acts of violence related to illegal deforestation in the Amazon. Then it needs to actually start supporting and protecting its forest defenders while strengthening environmental protection in the Amazon rainforest. Cesar Munoz Aceves, author of the Human Rights Watch report, said, "As long as you have this level of violence, lawlessness, and impunity for the crimes committed by these criminal groups, it will be impossible for Brazil to rein in deforestation. These criminal networks will attack anyone who stand in their way."
O madeireiro está ganhando, a floresta está sendo devastada e o problema ambiental está cada vez maior e ninguém faz nada.
Without the Amazon standing, we will never be able to control climate change. We will never be able to mitigate climate change. The Amazon is a centerpiece to the entire world to protect us as a species against climate change.
And what can you and I do about it? Well, I mean, I'll freely admit that I wasn't aware of this issue until very recently, and I'd wager that a lot of you weren't either. So if this is all new information to you, as it was for me, then you can pass it along to someone else who may be unaware of the situation too, because ultimately, knowledge is power, right? And bringing awareness to this issue can create change. It's easy for us to feel like it's a problem that we shouldn't concern ourselves with since, unless you live in Brazil, this is a problem taking place miles away, right? But the ramifications of this issue are far graver and more far-reaching than it may seem right now. And if these ranchers, these criminals, the rainforest mafia, whatever you want to call these assholes, if they continue to get away with their butchery of the Amazon, then by the time the eventual effects of this deforestation reaches our parts of the world, it may be too late to do anything about it. That said, thank you as always for watching. I know you have plenty of other online viewing options, so I appreciate you coming by and being here with me. And a special thank you to our Patreon members as well. I can't thank you enough for your support on that platform. And if you didn't know, I did just launch my Patreon, so if you're interested in further supporting my work, the link to the Patreon is down below. Either way, thank you all once again. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, night, morning, wherever you are. And until I see you next, I will leave you with the words of Sister Dorothy Stang.
To work so that we live in a sharing world, that we love each other, and we love each other in a caring way, so that everybody can, in a very democratic way, can share in these world's gifts. If they've been invented, why should only a few share in them? Why can't more people share in the marvelous creativity that has come to our planet. And so I think we have to change up a lot of our living patterns so that we can have a healthier world, a healthier planet. We have to learn to have the necessary things of life and not ask ourselves, what do we want, but what do I need?